All right, so we got the interesting NFL trade. Trey Lance going to the Cowboys. Cowboys giving up a fourth round pick. The 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch admitting defeat. I'm going to talk about the whole draft with Trey Lance, just completely overthinking it. But I also want to talk about what is the 49ers plan here with an absolute loaded roster. We expect them to get the Nick Bosa deal done. Could they possibly have Tom Brady in the back of their minds if Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold don't work out? Because remember, now that they've traded Trey Lance, which I think is kind of weird in general. I mean, Brock Purdy is 4-0 in his career, or like 5-0. He was the last pick in the draft, a year and a half ago. It just doesn't make that much sense to put this much faith to him and then Sam Darnold, who's become virtually a career journeyman. You could argue with Kyle Shanahan, Sam Darnold, he could be better, but the whole Trey Lance thing goes down. You can see there's Brock Purdy. I mean, this is just a lot of trust to put into someone who's Mr. Irrelevant. And he is 5-0, 13 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but he's coming off kind of a weird injury. Sam Darnold, we know his career, 21-34, hasn't been on the best of teams. Last year, you can kind of argue with Carolina, showed some things, maybe in a better offense with Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. He can do some stuff, but still just a lot of trust there. And the one thing I'll say, well, there's actually a few things with Tom Brady. Would he really return again? Is it really going to be this charade like Brett Favre 2.0 where he keeps coming back? Well, I think the only way he returns is if it's mid-season, possibly due to Brock Purdy getting injured or struggling. Kyle Shanahan, the reason I think this is Kyle Shanahan was in contact last year with Phillip Rivers for possibly, depending on what happened, if they would have gotten to the Super Bowl with Brock Purdy injured, they could have gone with Phillip Rivers, but it's confirmed, and he said, we were talking to Phillip Rivers, we were going to bring him in if we had gotten to the Super Bowl, so it's not like this is anything new for Kyle Shanahan. He just did it last year with a veteran quarterback who was supposedly already retired, which that's where Phillip Rivers was. He had retired the prior year, and he was sitting on the couch as a veteran QB. They would have possibly brought him in for the Super Bowl. Maybe Kyle Shanahan is lying, although I don't know why he would lie. It seems pretty realistic. So you've got Tom Brady, and listen, Tom Brady, let's just call it what it is. He had a decent year last year, 25 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on an offense that is worse than the one he'd be playing with in San Francisco. He'd have way more weapons. He'd have a good offensive line. They've got a great defense. They're a Super Bowl contending team, but they've got Brock Purdy at quarterback. And this is nothing against Brock Purdy. He had a fine rookie season. But again, this is literally the last pick in the entire draft. It just seems surprising. Like, why else would you trade Trey Lance? Wouldn't you want Trey Lance, who, I mean, I don't think Trey Lance has been terrible. He's only started like 2 games in his career, and I thought he showed a few things in preseason. He can run a little bit. Why not just keep Trey Lance as insurance if Brock Purdy re-injures himself? Sam Darnold, you can't trust him to be... It's like if you're starting Sam Darnold, I feel like the season's a wash. Now, maybe Sam Darnold comes back in like a Geno Smith type revenge tour and proves everyone wrong, but it does seem like the pieces are setting up for Tom Brady possibly to come in week 9 or week 10 of this year as kind of like late in the season. He doesn't have to practice much. He can come in late. And you can see this kind of sets up at Pittsburgh, at LA. Those are 2 tougher games. Possibly they could go 1-1 in those versus New York, versus Arizona, versus Dallas. I mean, those are winnable games. New York's decent. Arizona's terrible. Dallas is good. At Cleveland, I don't think that's necessarily a very easy game, especially the 1 o'clock time adjustment. That's going to be 10 a.m. Pacific. At Minnesota, that's not necessarily that easy versus Joe Burrow. And then you get the bye, and maybe during the bye week they would consider inserting Tom Brady. This is if Brock Purdy struggles or he gets injured. Obviously, if Brock Purdy is still good, if he continues on the success that he had last year. You're just going to keep Purdy in. You've got Darnold as your backup. But again, it just seems weird. Why would you trade Trey Lance after all you had invested into him when it's not like he really, I mean, I guess he must have been really struggling in practice if they were going to trade him. And then it was kind of curious that Dallas would trade him for a 4th round pick, with Dak Prescott there, although Prescott, I don't know what happened with Dak Prescott's contract. I thought he just signed a new deal like 2 years ago, and they're already talking about another new contract for him. So maybe Dallas, I mean, could you imagine Dak Prescott gets injured and Trey Lance breaks out for the Cowboys? I mean, they gave up like a 4th round pick, which apparently was significantly better than any of the other offers that the 49ers had. They just had to accept it. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was you look at this roster, you can see, I mean, depending on what you think of Brock Purdy, the quarterback might be a little bit of a weakness. They've got McCaffrey, they've got Elijah Mitchell, Deebo Samuel, who can also get some carries, Brandon Ayuk, who's a phenomenal number 2 receiver, Jennings is a great number 3, George Kittle, he's just got to stay healthy, Trent Williams, one of the best left tackles in football. So this is an absolute loaded, stacked roster. And you can see Tom Brady thinking about finding a training camp and proves he's still in shape. If Tom Brady does return, I'm going to say it's either going to be to the 49ers or the Dolphins because they've got that weird situation with Tua. And heaven forbid he gets another head injury. His career's probably over. And that is another team that's got Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. And I could see Tom Brady possibly going to one or two of those places. Although at some point, if you are Brady, it does become a bit of a charade. You've already retired twice. Would you seriously come back out and play? You don't want to speculate on his personal life, his wife, the issues there, possibly him playing too long. She ends up divorcing him. But of course, I'm sure he will be fine in terms of that. Either way, I just wanted to kind of talk about and discuss the potential scenario because we just saw this happen with Phillip Rivers. So you would think, Tom Brady, it's not like he fell off. This is not like Peyton Manning in his last year where it's just completely fallen off a cliff. I think Peyton Manning had 12 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. He did win the Super Bowl. You got to give him credit, but they were starting Brock Osweiler in front of him. That's how bad it got. Brady didn't really have that fall off. He still was decent. And it's like, considering his playoff pedigree, considering how loaded this team is, if you're Brady, you only live once. You want to go out and get in another ring. Wouldn't it be funny to try and do it depending on what happens with Brock Purdy? And we just saw Kyle Shanahan do a very similar thing where he was in contact with a recently retired quarterback in Phillip Rivers. And they were possibly going to bring him in depending on what would have happened with Purdy getting injured. The other thing I guess I'll just talk about is the whole Trey Lance pick. And I just think what a bad pick that was. Obviously, the Zach Wilson pick was terrible as well. I said it at the time. These teams are just outsmarting themselves. Everybody knew the 2 top talents by far were Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. Justin Fields right now is really polarizing, but I do think Justin Fields would be so phenomenal in that offense with that talent surrounding him. And just picking Trey Lance at number 3, just even the context of it was so dumb. North Dakota State, because of the pandemic and they're an FCS team, they played 1 game his junior year. Trey Lance barely played. I just can't understand some of these people just talking themselves into quarterbacks, I guess based on athleticism, but it feels like if you want an athletic quarterback, Justin Fields, who was the number 2 overall recruit in the country behind Trevor Lawrence, who went to Georgia, transferred to Ohio State. He's been in multiple college football playoff games. He's won multiple Big Ten championships. You would think if you want an athletic quarterback, that is the 1A option. Trey Lance is like a late first-round project from North Dakota State. Why would you draft Trey Lance 3rd overall? And it's like we see this time and time again with I guess Zach Wilson, you could say he lit it up at BYU, but even Zach Wilson was such a small quarterback. I don't know. It was just such a stupid pick, and it seemed very forced and like, oh, look at me, I'm going to do something different. And we'll have to see what happens with Brock Purdy. I mean, it's very hard to trust Brock Purdy to the point where can he really win you a Super Bowl? Maybe. I mean, if he plays like he did last year, certainly he can be serviceable enough to win the Super Bowl. But he was the last pick in the entire draft for a reason. This is very rare to see a quarterback taken that late in the 7th round perform that well as a rookie. He has a lot of talent around him, I get it. But him and Sam Darnold going into this season, if he gets hurt or if there's something where he's just not nearly as good and maybe now he proves that he's a 7th round pick and he struggles, I'm sure they're probably talking to Tom Brady. Maybe they're talking to Phillip Rivers, but I would go after Brady, honestly. And it seems like there's already been rumors in the past, when Brady was leaving New England, maybe he would go to San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. It seems like maybe week 9, week 10, something like this could end up happening. I guess we'll have to see. Either way, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.